The voice is low, almost a whisper, but in the marble corridor it carries like the clink of a dropped coin. You freeze. Behind the thin linen curtain, shadows shift. Hands smoothing hair, fingers sprinkling perfume into oil. The scent is heavy and sweet, almost cloying, and beneath it, faint but undeniable, lingers the smell of blood. From somewhere farther down the hall, a man laughs. The sound is thick with wine, self-assurance, and the privilege of a man who has never been told no. Footsteps draw nearer. You press yourself into the shadows just as he passes. A senator in his late 50s, robe loosened, gold signet ring catching the lamplight. He does not glance toward the curtained room. He does not need to. What happens inside is his by right and by Rome's law. Inside, 3 women work in silence. One grinds saffron into powder so fine it clings to her skin like dust. Another stirs the powder into warm rose water, watching the liquid turn the color of a dying sun. The third kneels beside a basin, scrubbing her forearms until the water runs pink. She does not look up. The mistress of the house, Adomina, stands before them in nothing but a silk wrap, her face painted pale with white lead, lips darkened with cinnabar. The poison in the paint will kill her slowly, but for now, it gives her the appearance demanded of women of her station. Beauty here is not an indulgence. It is a currency, and it must be maintained at any cost. Tonight, her husband hosts a dinner for a provincial governor and 2 influential senators. The feast has lasted for hours. Servants have brought out plates of oysters from Baiae, honeyed dormice, and pomegranates split open like wounds. The wine has flowed until the guests' words slur. Their gestures grow loose. Their laughter carries farther than decorum should allow. Soon they will withdraw to the villa's inner chambers, where politics and pleasure become indistinguishable. Adomina knows the evening's purpose. She knows that in Rome, a marriage is never just a union. It is a pact between families, a network of obligations, a performance in which she plays a critical role. Pudicitia, the Roman ideal of chastity, is not about innocence. It is about control, about a woman's body being entirely her husband's property, and entirely off limits to other men unless her husband allows otherwise. The contradiction is constant. Adomina must appear modest, yet she must also know how to charm her husband's allies. She must seem untouched, yet be entirely available when the household's interests require it. She must navigate the thin edge between respectability and utility, knowing that a single misstep could end her security, her reputation, even her life. A knock at the doorframe. A young male slave steps in, eyes fixed on the floor. "Domina," he murmurs, "they are asking for you." The women work quickly. The silk wrap is replaced with a gown dyed Tyrian purple, the most expensive color in the empire, worth more than gold by weight. Gold bracelets are clasped around her wrists, each one engraved with tiny scenes of lovers and gods. A final touch of perfume at her throat, spikenard imported from India, and she is ready. As she walks the corridor toward the triclinium, the air changes. The voices ahead are louder now, the laughter looser, the language more suggestive. She can feel the eyes that will turn toward her, the silent measurements being made. Her beauty, her bearing, her usefulness. When she steps into the lamplight of the dining room, the conversation pauses. 3 men glance up. Her husband smiles, not with affection, but with satisfaction, as though presenting a prize. She takes her place beside him, her posture perfect, her smile faint. The rest of the night will unfold in subtle gestures, a hand brushing an arm, a shared glance over a cup of wine, a quiet suggestion spoken behind a closed door. The political fate of several men may be decided before dawn, sealed not by ink and parchment, but by the unrecorded terms of flesh and favor. In this villa, in this city, intimacy is never truly private. It is a commodity, a weapon, a means of survival. Every corridor hides its secrets. Every curtain shields a negotiation. And every smile, no matter how soft, has been measured against the cost of refusal. Adomina knows this better than most. She learned it young, watching her mother navigate similar nights with the same careful balance of allure and restraint. She has seen the women who failed to manage it, sent away, disgraced, or worse. In Rome, a woman's worth is a fragile thing, and once it is lost, there is no buying it back. Tonight, she will play her role perfectly. Tomorrow, perhaps, she will wake with a new ally secured for her husband, a rival undermined, a debt owed. Or perhaps she will wake simply relieved that she has survived another performance without misstep. She smooths the folds of her gown, lifts her cup, and listens to the men speak of trade routes and military campaigns. She laughs when required, her eyes steady, her voice calm. And when the governor's gaze lingers a moment too long, she does not look away. In the Roman Empire, survival is an art, and Adomina is an artist. In Rome, ownership was not just about land, coins, or livestock. It extended to people, completely legally and without shame. Slaves were not considered human beings under the law. They were property, no different than a set of silver cups or a span of mules. And unlike land, they could be used in ways that went beyond labor. A wealthy household could contain dozens of slaves, and their duties were carefully ranked. Some worked in the kitchens, some in the fields, some as scribes or tutors. But the most prized and most vulnerable were the personal attendants, the ones who dressed, bathed, and entertained their owners. These slaves were chosen not just for skill, but for physical appearance. Smooth skin, symmetrical features, certain elegance of movement. Grooming was a constant ritual. In the cubicula, the small sleeping chambers, slave girls spent hours plucking hairs from their mistresses' legs, arms, and even underarms using bronze tweezers. Wealthy men demanded the same treatment. Body hair was associated with the unrefined, the barbarian. Smooth skin was not just fashionable. It signified civilization and dominance. For many slaves, these grooming duties carried an unspoken expectation. Touching the master's or mistress's body, even in the name of hygiene, could shift in an instant from service to sexual use. There was no consent to give or withhold. It was assumed. A slave's refusal, if even possible, could be punished by beating, branding, or death. Roman law was explicit. A master could use a slave sexually whenever he wished. A mistress could do the same, though her actions were judged more harshly by society. The double standard was not subtle. It was a pillar of Roman patriarchy. A man's use of his slaves was his right. A woman's use of hers was a potential scandal because it hinted at the loss of control by her husband. In wealthier homes, sexualized labor was built into the hierarchy. A poor delicatus, a delicate boy, might be purchased in adolescence, raised in the household, and kept for beauty as much as for service. These boys were dressed in fine tunics, perfumed, and shielded from heavy labor to preserve their appearance. Their fates were precarious. Aging out of desirability meant being sent to harsher duties or sold to a less merciful master. Concubinage blurred the line between slavery and marriage. A free man could take a concubine, a woman who lived with him in a sexual relationship, but without the legal rights of a wife. She might be a slave, or she might be free but of lower social rank, unsuitable for marriage under Roman law. Some concubines gained influence, even affection, but they remained legally vulnerable. A master could dismiss a concubine at will, and any children she bore him were illegitimate unless formally recognized. Markets for such bodies were not hidden. In Rome's slave markets, buyers inspected potential purchases as they would livestock, noting teeth, muscle tone, and complexion. Sellers provided detailed accounts: age, origin, skills, health. A girl from the Greek islands, trained in music and conversation, fetched a higher price than a farm laborer from Gaul. The most expensive were those considered exotic by Roman tastes: Ethiopian girls, Germanic youths, Syrian dancers. For the enslaved, survival required a difficult calculus. Beauty was dangerous. It drew attention, the wrong kind as often as the right. But it could also be a shield, if it secured a place in a powerful household rather than a labor camp. Some learned to charm their owners, gaining small privileges: better clothing, more food, a softer bed. Others kept their heads down, hoping to be overlooked. Even freed slaves carried the weight of ownership in their past. A master could grant manumissio, freedom, to a favored slave, often after years of service. But this freedom came with strings. The freed person became a libertus or liberta, still tied to their former owner through obligations of loyalty, work, and political support. Some ex-slaves became wealthy in their own right, managing businesses or estates. Yet the mark of their origin never faded in the eyes of society. Sexual use of slaves was not whispered about. It was joked about in taverns, written into satirical poetry, even painted on the walls of bathhouses. The shame was never on the master. The shame belonged to the enslaved, as though exploitation were a stain they had chosen. The cruelty of this logic was invisible to most Romans. It was simply the order of the world. Adomina's household was no exception. She had inherited 6 female slaves from her mother, all trained in grooming, sewing, and quiet compliance. She had learned early how to issue orders that kept them useful and silent. Sometimes she caught herself wondering about their thoughts, whether they hated her, whether they dreamed of freedom. But such thoughts were dangerous. They chipped away at the certainty that her own position depended on their obedience. For the senators and governors who passed through her home, these women were part of the hospitality. A guest might admire the way a slave poured wine, the way her tunic shifted on her shoulders, and the host would smile knowingly. Nothing needed to be said. A slave could be sent to a guest's room without any discussion, her absence unremarked by morning. The villa's marble floors gleamed under lamplight, but in the slave quarters, the air was close and smelled of sweat and oil. Straw mats lined the floor. Privacy did not exist. A cough in the night could wake everyone. Some slaves whispered stories from their homelands. Others lay silent, staring into the dark. They knew that in this city, their bodies were not their own, and never would be. To the Romans, this was not hypocrisy. It was the natural extension of power. The empire conquered peoples, took their land, took their gold, and took their children. Those children grew up speaking Latin, serving wine, warming the beds of the very people who had destroyed their homes. The cycle fed itself, generation after generation. In the heart of the empire, a slave's beauty was both their shield and their chain. It could keep them alive. It could also ensure they never escaped the gaze that owned them. In Rome, marriage was never just a private matter. It was a transaction, a political maneuver, a calculated merging of assets and influence. Love was not the point. Love when it appeared, was a fortunate accident. Pleasant, but irrelevant to the true purpose of the union. A Roman marriage began not with flowers or poetry, but with negotiation. Fathers met in courtyards or atriums, surrounded by scrolls, coins, and the steady gaze of witnesses. They discussed dues, the dowry, measured in land, cash, or slaves. The size of this dowry was not just a gift, it was insurance. If the marriage ended, the dowry was supposed to return to the wife's family, though supposed to often proved a fragile promise. There were different kinds of marriages, each with its own rules. In cum manu marriages, the wife passed entirely into her husband's authority, legally severed from her birth family. Everything she owned became his. In sine manu marriages, she remained under her father's legal power even as she lived with her husband. This arrangement gave her family more leverage and her husband less control. The elite favored sine manu for precisely that reason. The legal age for marriage was shockingly low by modern standards: 12 for girls, 14 for boys. In reality, wealthy men often married in their late 20s or 30s, once they had secured a career. Girls, however, were married young, their bodies still narrow-hipped, their faces not yet free of childhood softness. Fertility was the goal, not mutual understanding. Adomina had been married at 14. She remembered little of her wedding day, beyond the weight of the wreath on her head and the way her new husband's hand felt on her shoulder, heavy, claiming. There had been no chance to refuse. A refusal would have been a kind of madness, a rejection not just of a man, but of the entire network of expectations that sustained her family. Weddings were public performances. The bride wore a saffron veil, the color of fire, meant to ward off evil. She carried a distaff and spindle to symbolize her future role in the household, and in the evening she was escorted to her husband's home by torchlight. Guests sang ribald songs at the doorway, obscene verses meant to chase away bad spirits, though they also served to remind everyone of the sexual consummation expected that night. The marriage market was ruthless in its logic. A well-born woman's value lay in her ability to bear legitimate heirs. Legitimacy was everything. A child born outside lawful marriage, even to a wealthy father, could not inherit. This made a wife's sexual fidelity not just a moral duty, but an economic safeguard for the family line. The reverse was not true. A husband could have mistresses, concubines, and slaves without legal consequence, so long as he did not pursue a married woman of equal status. That was adultery in the eyes of the law, a crime not against the wife, but against the other man's household. Marriage contracts sometimes included clauses about behavior, finances, and the return of the dowry in case of divorce. Divorce itself was easy to initiate for men. A simple declaration before witnesses, "Keep your things," or "You are now for yourself," could end it. Women could request divorce, but in practice, they did so only if they had strong family backing. Without it, they risked losing children, property, and social standing. Despite these restrictions, some women wielded surprising influence through marriage. A wife with political intelligence could guide her husband's alliances, introduce useful acquaintances, or manage the household's estates with skill. In Rome's upper classes, a household was not a mere residence. It was a political theater, and the wife was expected to direct its daily performance. Adomina's position depended entirely on her ability to maintain her husband's trust while making herself indispensable to his ambitions. She managed the guest lists for dinners, chose which visitors were received, and oversaw the education of young relatives in the household. Every choice was strategic. To offend the wrong person was to invite whispers. To favor the right one was to gain a debt that could be called in later. Marriage in Rome was less about permanence than about advantage. Alliances shifted with politics, and so did marriages. A senator might divorce his wife to marry into a more powerful family, or to secure a dowry large enough to finance a campaign for higher office. The discarded wife might remarry within months, her new match chosen with equal calculation. For the lower classes, marriage was less formal. Many simply lived together, raising children without legal ceremony. But for the elite, marriage was too valuable a tool to be left to chance. It was a public declaration of status, a signal to rivals and allies alike. The appearance of harmony was as important as the reality. Still, beneath the contracts and ceremonies, human desires persisted. Some husbands fell in love with their wives, guarding them fiercely. Some wives found passion outside the marriage, risking ruin for moments of joy. And some, like Adomina, learned to navigate the narrow space between personal feeling and public duty, locking their private selves away for safety. One autumn night, after a feast, her husband leaned close and murmured that the governor had been impressed with her composure, her restraint. He said it like a compliment, but she heard the warning beneath it. Never give too much, never reveal too much. She smiled as expected and poured him more wine. The marriage market in Rome was not for the naive. It was a battlefield, one where women's weapons were wit, patience, and the careful use of charm. The stakes were survival, security, and the fragile possibility of influence in a world that pretended they had none. And always, behind the gold bracelets and the saffron veil, there was the unspoken truth. In Rome, even love could be bought, sold, and measured like any other possession. In Rome, sex was not purely private. It belonged to the realm of the gods as much as to the body. The empire's religion was full of deities who touched the human world through desire, fertility, and the dangerous power of reproduction. Pleasure was a gift, but one that had to be managed, channeled, and, when necessary, restrained. Fertility rituals took place in the open. During the festival of Lupercalia in February, young men stripped naked except for a goatskin thong, smeared themselves with sacrificial blood, and ran through the streets laughing. They carried strips of goatskin, striking women lightly on the hands or belly as they passed. The blows were meant to encourage conception in the year ahead. Elite matrons stood in doorways, veils drawn back, waiting for the sting of leather against their palms. Priests oversaw ceremonies in which offerings were made to Venus, goddess of love, or to Priapus, a rustic deity whose statues, with exaggerated phalluses, were placed in gardens to ward off evil. Fertility was not an abstract hope. It was a civic duty. Every child was a future worker, soldier, or mother of more citizens. But there was another side to this sacred sexuality: fear. The same gods who could bless a union could also curse it. Miscarriages, infertility, or difficult births were often seen as signs of divine displeasure. Women might be sent to temples to perform days-long rituals of purification, fasting, or abstinence to restore favor. The line between medical treatment and spiritual remedy was almost invisible. In the private sphere, the state still kept watch. Augustus, the first emperor, passed laws encouraging marriage and punishing adultery, not out of moral zeal, but because the elite population was shrinking. Wealthy Romans were avoiding marriage, preferring lovers or concubines, and producing too few legitimate heirs. Augustus needed the ruling class replenished. The laws rewarded parents of 3 or more children with political advantages, and punished childless adults with financial restrictions. Adultery became a public crime. A father could legally kill his daughter's lover if caught in the act under his roof. A husband was expected to divorce an adulterous wife immediately, or risk being accused of lenocinium, pimping, for tolerating her behavior. The punishments were severe: exile to remote islands, confiscation of property, social disgrace. For men, the definition of adultery remained narrow. Sleeping with prostitutes or slaves was not a crime. The law was written to protect lineage, not fidelity. Behind closed doors, sexual life was layered with ritual and hierarchy. Wealthy households often employed aliptes, body attendants, whose massages could be as intimate as they were therapeutic. Baths, both public and private, were spaces where the boundaries between grooming, pleasure, and politics blurred. Deals were made in the steam rooms. Seductions unfolded in the warm pools under flickering lamplight. Not all pleasure was sanctioned. Rome had its own shadows. Underground gatherings, secretive clubs where masks were worn and roles reversed. The poet Juvenal wrote scathingly of noblewomen who sought thrills beyond their husbands, slipping out in disguise to meet gladiators or actors. Whether his tales were satire or fact hardly mattered. They shaped the image of female desire as dangerous, even treacherous. For men, especially those of high rank, indulgence was expected to have limits. Excess could be political suicide. A senator too obsessed with feasts, lovers, or exotic entertainments risked losing the respect that held his power in place. Moderation was the Roman ideal, even if the reality often fell short. Adomina understood this balance instinctively. Her role as hostess demanded that she allow her guests a taste of luxury. Sweet wines, polished conversation, the sight of beauty, but never enough to cross into chaos. Her own pleasures were private and carefully rationed. A misstep could undo years of building her reputation. Yet she could not ignore the quiet currents running beneath her household. She knew which slaves favored one another, which guests lingered too long in the baths, which young men eyed the serving girls with calculated patience. Desire was a force she could neither suppress nor fully control, but she could shape it, redirect it, so that it served her and her husband standing. The gods themselves were no strangers to human failings. Their myths were filled with seduction, betrayal, and violence. Jupiter took mortal lovers in the form of animals or rain. Venus abandoned her duties to pursue the beautiful mortal Adonis. Even Mars, god of war, was caught in bed with Venus, trapped by Vulcan's cunning net while the other gods laughed. These stories were not moral lessons. They were reflections of Roman acceptance that power and desire were entwined. In the temples, worshippers offered doves, incense, or coins, asking for beauty, passion, or the end of loneliness. In darker corners of the city, charms were sold to inspire lust in a reluctant lover, or to render a rival impotent. Magic and religion blurred as easily as pleasure and politics. Pain was part of the equation too. Birth itself was dangerous, one of the leading causes of death for Roman women. Midwives, armed with herbal remedies and hard-earned experience, could only do so much. The gods might be invoked for mercy, but they were as likely to test a woman's endurance as to save her. A safe delivery was cause for public celebration. A death in childbirth was met with solemn resignation. Another reminder that life in Rome was at the mercy of forces both divine and human. The paradox was constant. Rome celebrated sexuality in art, poetry, and ritual, yet bounded in law, custom, and the demands of empire. Pleasure was acknowledged as a natural part of life, but only certain pleasures, taken in certain ways, were safe. Everything else had to be hidden, coded, or denied. For Adomina, the rules were clear. Her body was both her own and not her own. Hers to inhabit, but also a vessel for alliances, appearances, and the will of the household gods. In the marble stillness of her chamber, she sometimes wondered whether the gods cared at all, or if their altars were only mirrors reflecting the desires of those who built them. Centuries have passed since the last torch burned in the forum, since the marble baths cooled to silence and the Senate's voices fell still. Yet Rome's rules about the body, its uses, its limits, its worth, did not vanish with the empire. They sank into the soil of law, religion, and custom, sending roots into the centuries that followed. In the modern world, the language has changed, the clothing has changed, but the structure remains familiar. Marriage as a contract, sexuality managed by the state. The body turned into currency, sometimes literal, sometimes symbolic, in exchanges of status, security, or influence. The Roman household was the blueprint, and its influence still shapes the rooms we live in now. Adomina's life, if recorded at all, would have been reduced to a name on a tombstone, her story told only through the achievements of her husband. She would be wife of, mother of, a note in the ledger of a greater man's life. Countless women like her moved through Rome's marble corridors and narrow streets, unseen except in the reflection of male ambition. Yet they shaped the empire's daily rhythm, managing estates, guiding marriages, and ensuring the quiet functioning of households that supported public power. When historians reconstruct Rome's sexual culture, they draw on legal codes, satirical poetry, and the occasional scandal preserved in letters. But these sources were written by men, for men. The perspective of the women, especially the enslaved, the poor, and the young, is almost entirely absent. What survives is filtered, edited, framed to suit the storyteller's purpose. The reality was likely far more complex and far more brutal. And yet, in the shadows of this absence, patterns emerge. The commodification of intimacy, the unequal standards of fidelity, the idea that a woman's sexual reputation is a public concern, while a man's desires are private business. Rome did not invent these patterns, but it gave them a legal architecture that proved enduring. The echoes are strongest in places where the law still governs the body, in the concept of legitimacy in inheritance law, in political scandals where a woman's sexuality is treated as a matter of national interest, in the expectation that female virtue is both personal and public property. These are Roman legacies, refined and repeated until they seem natural. Even the rituals linger. Weddings still carry traces of Roman symbolism. The white dress, descended from the bridal tunica, the veil, the processional to a shared home. Public celebrations still merge with private vows, echoing the Roman view that marriage was never just a private affair. The gods are gone, but the surveillance remains. In Rome, the law demanded that bodies serve the state, through reproduction, through labor, through the maintenance of social order. Today, the mechanisms are subtler. Economic pressure, cultural expectation, legal frameworks that define who can marry, who can parent, who can control their own body. For Adomina, survival meant mastery of the rules. She could not dismantle the system, but she could navigate it, bending its edges to make room for herself. Her strategies: silence where speech would be dangerous, generosity where it would create loyalty, charm deployed as armor, were as essential as food or shelter. In that sense, she was no different from millions who have lived under similar constraints in every age. There is a temptation to imagine that with the fall of Rome came liberation, that modernity washed away the old codes. But the truth is more tangled. The Roman worldview, with its blend of pragmatism and control, seeped into medieval canon law, Renaissance court culture, and colonial administrations. It was carried in the writings of jurists, the sermons of priests, the private advice of parents to daughters. Rome's obsession with regulating pleasure and reproduction had one enduring consequence. It kept the private body tethered to public order. This was not mere prudishness. It was governance. A citizen's body was part of the machinery of empire, and pleasure was tolerated only when it reinforced that machinery. That logic did not vanish. It adapted. In the quieter hours of her life, Adomina may have imagined another world. Perhaps she pictured herself walking unescorted through the Subura's crowded markets, free to buy what she pleased. Perhaps she thought of lovers chosen for affection, not alliance. Or perhaps she dared to imagine no gods at all, no law peering into the bedroom, no whispered judgment following her steps. We cannot know. What we do know is that her reality and the reality of countless others formed the foundation of systems that still govern our lives. The past is not a closed room. It is a corridor that runs directly into the present, its doors opening onto familiar shapes. The historian's task is to illuminate that corridor, to show how the stones of Roman law and custom were repurposed into the walls of our own world. But the storyteller's task, the one that matters here, is to remind us that within those walls lived people with fears, desires, and moments of rebellion that left no trace in the official record. In the end, Rome's story is not marble and triumphal arches. It is a story of control, who had it, who didn't, and the ways in which people survived under its weight. The empire is gone, but the questions it forced upon its people remain. Who owns the body? Who decides what is permissible? And how much of our desire is truly ours when the state, the church, or society claims a share? The answers are as contested now as they were in the shadow of the Palatine Hill. We still measure reputation by intimacy, still judge women more harshly than men, still turn private choices into public debates. The faces have changed, the clothing has changed, but the structure remains. Adomina's world ended long ago, yet her shadows walk beside us. They stand in courtrooms where laws about the body are argued. They hover in the language of marriage contracts and family law. They breathe in the unspoken rules about who may desire whom and how openly. They are reminders that history is not behind us. It is within us, shaping the boundaries of our freedom. Rome fell, but the empire's most enduring conquest was not territory. It was the human body, claimed in the name of order, sanctity, and the greater good. That empire still stands, invisible yet solid. Its laws written not in stone, but in the habits, fears, and compromises we carry forward. And like the marble of Rome's ruins, it will endure until we decide it will not.